All right, perfect. Looks like you can hear me. Hi, my name's Helena. So glad you are here. I am in the middle of Sedona right now. Let me know where you're joining me from. And then something you should know about me is I am a coach for new and first year teachers. So if you could let me know in the comments um, what grade you teach and how long you've been teaching. So it looks like we have Margaret. She says hello from South Carolina. I teach second grade, year 12. It's so exciting. I love second grade. Taught second grade for several years. Favorite grade ever. Then we got Brittany Brown. It looks like she's logging in from MD, ninth year, teaching secondary English. Awesome, awesome. So a little bit about me. I taught primary for a couple of years. I taught kinder for 3 years and second for 3 years. And so around my first year of teaching, I actually reached burnout despite graduating with my master's, and I debated whether or not teaching was for me. So I ended up, figuring out a way to make teaching work. And through that time, I had extra spare time, and I started creating a business on the side that says I'm teacher. And I started using those systems I learned for, business into teaching, and I found they worked really, really well. So if you haven't caught my session yet, I talk about classroom running activities. So classroom running activities are the things that I have in place in my classroom to keep my classroom running. I like to think of them as things that I have to get done on a weekly or daily basis. Otherwise, my classroom is just going to completely fall apart. And I talked about coming up with my classroom running activities. And for me, that was classroom management, communication, organization, data collection, grading, and then planning. And so those are the different areas I like to focus on in the classroom. And my mind works kind of in a mysterious way. I come up with systems to make things easier. My first year of teaching, I felt like I was so busy tackling everything else that I wasn't able to be there in the present for my kids. Let me know if you can relate to this, but it felt like, I'd be there teaching my students, but really I was thinking about, oh, I'm behind on these lesson plans. I really need to respond to that parent and all that. And I wasn't actually being there in the moment for my kids, so that when the time finally came that my students graduated, I felt like I had failed them and I had missed the entire year. And so my mission here at the Present Teacher, yay, Brittany, you can definitely relate. Thank you so much. So it feels like you missed the entire year and it feels like you could do better. And so that's when I started creating systems to automate my classroom. And I know in my session, I talked about coming up with different areas. I kind of wanted to dive deeper, if it's okay with you, on what automating my classroom looks like. Obviously, I can't take you to my students and show you. Let me know if you have any other questions other than what I covered. But I kind of wanted to tell you what it looks like for me from before and now. So before, let's talk about classroom management. Classroom management was one of those things that I definitely struggled with my first couple of years of teaching. I was relying heavily on what other teachers were using, and I wasn't really relying on myself. I was so scared I would mess it up. So what I ended up doing is I'd go online, maybe TikTok. TikTok wasn't really around back then. I'm dating myself, but like Pinterest, and I would do things like blurt beans, clip charts, sticker stores, parties, and all this stuff. And some of it worked, but a lot of it definitely didn't. And so what I found was I was actually listening to everybody else's opinion on what should work in my classroom instead of relying on what resonated with me. And so for me, I started getting clear on my values. And this is something any first year teacher, new teacher that I interact with, when they ask me what's the biggest thing you can do, it's getting clear on what kind of teacher you want to be. So thinking back to, what are some teachers that you've seen and you really like what they do? And what kind of values do you think that they have? And then what are some areas that maybe you've seen another teacher do and you don't necessarily agree with it, not because it's bad, it just doesn't align with you. So an example of this was one of my mentor teachers. She was super engaging and positive, and I loved that about her. So one of the things I wanted to make sure I did as a teacher was that I was engaging and positive. On the flip side, I had another mentor teacher of mine who would raise her voice when she got frustrated at the kids. And not that that was bad. it just didn't really necessarily align with me and how I wanted to teach and the kind of teacher I wanted to be. So for me, that meant to make sure I was doing practices that kept me calm and positive and focusing more on the positive behavior than calling out negative behavior in front of the class. Not that, again, her way was wrong. So coming up with, 3 to 5 values that you have and, when you see strategies, whether it's here on this, in the summit or even online, ask yourself, does this align with the kind of teacher I want to be? So for me, going back to classroom management, a lot of teachers in my building were using flip charts. And if you're not familiar with what flip charts are, there's these little pieces of paper, primarily used in primary and elementary. You start off at one color, and as students behave in a positive way, they flip up or flip down. And typically it's called out in front of the whole class. That didn't really feel aligned with me. And I was using it because everyone else was, but I wasn't listening to my values. So instead, I started asking myself, well, one of my values is to be positive. So what strategy can I use instead that'll be positive? I always said I feel bad for my classes in the past. Yes, didn't have too many resources and knowledge. Exactly. And I feel like as you start, you learn as you go, and you're trying a bunch of things. But I feel like getting really clear on what kind of teacher you're going to be and want to be can really help you define which strategies are worth your time and which ones weren't. I found that those strategies that primarily focused on, pointing out negative behavior didn't align with me just because my value was being positive. So getting clear on that. Now, talking about automating your classroom management, for example, my goal, hi Ariel from Alabama, so glad you're here. So my goal for classroom management, I know I've done a really good job when I can sit back and not heat up my coffee 20 times. So if I can sit back and watch my kids move throughout the day without me saying a word, I know I've done it. And for me, how I get there, and I've learned to get there based on my strategies and my values, is I make sure to focus heavily on procedures. What does it look like? What does it sound like to go from point A to point B? And then also, I like to focus on using music in transitions. So background, I'm a primary teacher mostly. I've had some experience in the past year working with middle school, but what I would do is as I would teach the procedure on what it looked like and sound like, I would pair it with music. So that way I didn't have to say anything. My students would transition from point A to point B. So some songs I've used for my primary kids is like Happy by the Minions. I like to dance and sing. That's just the kind of teacher I am. I'm not very loud about it. I'm very actually soft-spoken. So we do like the Cupid Shuffle or the Kids Bop Shuffle. And we would Kids Bop Shuffle from one transition or one center to another. So thinking of some ways that I can just incorporate my personality, but do it in a way that it's automatic. And I love telling the story. I had to step out to talk to admin a couple of years ago, and my special education teacher at the time said she'd watch my class while I talked to them. So I stepped out, I talked to admin. I came back about 45 minutes later, and my students had finished transitioning all through centers. I went to whole group reading all by themselves because I had a teacher helper who was, pushing the music, and they knew at what point in the song to transition from one thing to another. They had transitioned all through centers, done them all, and went to whole group reading. And she was amazed. She said, I don't know how they did that, but I didn't do anything. I just watched them. And so when you have stuff like that, those systems in your classroom, teaching gets to feel easy, and it's kind of hard to explain, but it's fun again. I have the freedom now to be fun, to be me, to have fun with my kids, to meet them where they're at every day, and not worry about all the million other things going on in the background. Yes, thank you. I love using music during my classes. Yes, me too. And even with, because like I said, this last year, I've kind of had a unique position in my district where I got to work with middle school kids. I would do the same thing. We'd have a song where we'd transition. Typically, it was background music to some popular songs that they listened to. It wasn't, lyrics not included, but and that would be their whole group time. So they knew during that time they were going to work on their assignment for 30 minutes straight. And then when we transitioned out of it, I hit a song, and they knew it was time to move on to the next thing. So it's a great way to transition from one thing to another. But thinking of ways that you can do that in the classroom to help you out. Another common question I been getting lately is maybe last year you were a first year teacher and you really struggled with planning. So let's talk about planning. I thought about brag tags this year instead of treasure box. Yes, I actually used that this year or this last couple of years. I do love calls. So what they are, instead of using a clip chart, I've been doing like super improver walls or just love notes. So, or just positive notes, blow notes. I'll send a positive note home. Or if my students are working in a whole group or in an independent work area, I'll grab the phone and I will call their family in the middle of class, especially if I'm not working with somebody, and I will praise them and say, I loved how, so-and-so's working so hard today. Would you like to talk to them? And especially my primary kids, I get to say hi to mom, dad, grandma, whoever is taking care of them. And it's such an uplifting, positive thing for them. And it's helping build positive relationships with my family. So definitely love brag tags. I think that's a great idea. So let's talk about maybe planning a little bit, because this was something I definitely struggled with. I was the first teacher there, last teacher to leave. I was working on the weekends, and coming up with a way to plan ahead was really hard. And so for me, that was like, I picked a day to lesson plan. Instead of planning the day before every day, I picked one day a week. And for me, that was Monday. And I would sit down and I would try to get the whole week worth of planning done in a day. And then what happened was I started getting faster and faster as I did it. I don't know if you can remember this, but we had like mad minute math where you would sit there and you try to do as many multiplication boxes as you could in a minute. And even if you couldn't do it all the way, you could get faster and faster. Well, the same thing happened with me. I focused on Mondays getting 1 week of lesson plans done. And then eventually it turned into, okay, I've finished, 1 week of lesson plans in 20 minutes. I have 20 minutes left. I'm going to do 2 weeks now at a time, and then 3 weeks. And before I knew it, I was batching. I was weeks out in advance the faster I got. And especially when you're in your second or third year, you can start using resources from previous years, and that can really help you too. So, question, what other classroom management strategies or planning strategies do you like to use in your classroom? I'm curious. I'm all about hearing different strategies. So that's how it looks like for me, is figuring out which systems can I use in the classroom that work for me and how my brain works. And creating a schedule that I absolutely love is what I like to do. And like I said, it gives you a lot of freedom that way. So for me, like I said, planning, it gets easier and easier as you go. And then I was able to do more than 1 week at a time. So I don't know, maybe another area that I talked about that's in the Thriving Teacher Framework is communication. So when you have, one thing I don't feel like teachers talk about enough is when you have positive communication with families, oftentimes you'll see positive behavior in the classroom. If you have a bad relationship with families, oftentimes your students will reflect that to you in the class. So one thing I definitely learned after my first couple of years of teaching was making sure I had a good, positive relationship with my families. And I started to think back to when I was teaching. And I remember, my family only got a call from my teachers when something was wrong, behavior-wise, or when I was sick. And I started to think, okay, how can I change that dynamic? Because it's no wonder some families don't want to answer because they're so used to hearing something negative. So I started doing positive communication home, and I try to do that as a primary teacher of 25, 30 kids, maybe once a quarter or once a month if I can, or every other month. I try to do a positive note home. So whether that's, writing an email, doing class dojo, doing a love call, something like that. And that's a great way to build those positive relationships with your families. And that way you're showing your families that you care about your students and that, you're there for the positive and the negative, and you have their best interest at heart. I know that that's kind of just a given, but sometimes families can kind of be rubbed the wrong way because that's communication. And then whenever I approach them with something, like a scenario happening in class, or like behavior or academics, I'd be like, here's what I'm seeing in class. How can we fix it together? What solutions can we come up with to work as a team? And that felt a lot better energetically for me and my families, as opposed to being like, this is what I'm doing, here's how I'm going to fix it, what are you doing? was more like, let's work together because I care about your student and we can work on this together. And then as far as consistent family communication goes, I did weekly or monthly newsletters, and I worked smarter, not harder. I had a Harry Potter classroom for my second grade class, and we had the weekly prophet from the Daily Prophet. And I made those, and I would make them the week before, and I'd print them out and attach them to homework if I was giving homework, and then I would upload it as a PDF to an email or Class Dojo. That way it was in two places, and I never had to worry about a family member telling me they didn't see it because it was always in two spots. Positive notes or calls. That's what I struggle with, positive notes or calls. Yes, absolutely. And it's hard to find the time, but what I found, like I said, if I had a list of all my students and I noticed they were doing something positive in class and I had a moment where I wasn't working with somebody, I would do those calls in the middle of class or even at the end of the day or even on a long weekend. Sometimes I just sit there with the kids' rosters and I just get all of them out while I'm watching TV or Friends or something like that and just write them all out and I can hand them out throughout the month. That really helps save me time. But coming up with whether it's monthly, semi-monthly, semi-weekly ways to communicate with families so they stay in the loop is going to help you with a long ways. And then instead of, as far as like coworkers go, I found that I would maybe check in with my coworkers on my prep, but that took a majority of my prep most times and I fell behind. So instead, I picked a day that was my communication day. So Wednesdays were communication. So whether I was sending, I was working on my family newsletter for the upcoming week or weeks once I got faster, or if I would also check in with my coworkers. Where are we at with our pacing? Am I where you are? Do you need any resources? I have questions about this. And I would just save all my questions for that one time a week instead of checking in throughout. Well, I think that's good, but not necessarily on my prep. That kind of saves me time instead of checking in and then getting sidetracked and losing that prep time. So that's another area. And then I would say the next area was grading. Let me know if you've struggled with this or you've done this before in the comments. Please let me know I'm not alone. Have you ever waited to grade and your basket's just getting full and piling up and then report cards are due, so you're practically pulling an all-nighter, working an entire weekend to get caught up, or you don't end up grading all of it? Let me know if you struggled with this too, because I struggled with that a lot. It got so bad that one year my principal came in, first year of teaching, I think, or second. She saw the pile of papers that was, collecting, and she said, "Are you going to finish grading that?" I felt so embarrassed of, just trying to keep up with it all. So for me, there's a couple systems that I've used in the classroom that's helped me with grading. So the first one was, let me know if you use mailboxes. Again, this is probably more primary age, but my students, we used mailboxes and they were horrific because teaching kinders to nicely put their papers down and not shove them towards the back was a hard procedure I had to hit every year. And then on top of that, they would just kind of clutter. I like how you had a day for communication. I struggled with having time for that. Exactly, yes. So what I often did, and I have, I think, a picture on my presentation that I talk about, but my whole schedule, in case you're wondering, is Monday was lesson planning, Tuesdays was prepping. So everything that I lesson planned the day before, I wrote lesson plans for. That next day, I would gather all the resources and print them all out. So Tuesdays, they joked I was hanging out by the printer all day because I was for my prep. I would sit there, I'd print everything for 2 weeks out. And then Wednesdays, I would communicate. So emails that fell behind, reminders on Class Dojo, my newsletters. If admin sent me something, that was the day I did that. Thursdays were for grading. I would sit down and I would grade everything on my Thursdays. And then Fridays were free days because if someone had me cover, a class on my prep, if there was an assembly on my prep, if there was no special teacher that day, it wasn't that big of a deal because I could shift everything. And then honestly, by Fridays, I don't feel like doing anything. So having a day to just kind of decompress and be my introverted self is really helpful. I was always taking papers home to grade. Me too. I also use teacher mailbox. The students can tell me things privately. I love that idea, Margaret. Thank you. I'm gonna have to write that down. I like that. That's a good idea. Ooh, and with like my Harry Potter costume, I could do it with a mouse. I love that idea. Thank you. So, but for me, instead of using teacher mailbox or my student mailboxes, I ended up doing a milk crate. Now I know this sounds wild, but hold on here, bear with me. I would use a milk crate and I would put files in there, and I would file them by name or by the student number. And what I ended up doing is whenever my students had to turn something in that wasn't necessarily for a grade, like an assessment, it was just kind of like practice work. That was like a quick glance, yes or no. I would have them file it by their name. And then any assessments that I knew I had to grade and I didn't necessarily want them looking at each other's, I would collect those. And then on Thursdays, I would sit down, I would get the huge milk crate, and I would just grade it by student because they're not necessarily, going in the grade book, but I want to see where they're at academically. And I would put those into their homework folders because on Fridays, all the work was sent home. And then at the same time on my Thursdays, I would sit there with my podcast and my music, and I would just grade all the assessments, and I would make my copies, and I'd file it to send home. That way I had my systems, and I didn't have to think about it, and I didn't have to worry about falling behind on grading again because I had my specific day, which was Thursdays for grading, because Fridays were going home. I did that last year as well. Oh, yay! That's not the only one. I also love using student numbers. Me too. I don't know why I didn't think about doing it earlier. I wrote my students' names on everything. Then each year you have to rewrite everybody's names instead of just using numbers. It takes so much time. So using numbers is like, yes, definitely worth it. So that was my hack for grading was, all the assessments at once. And then any practice work, file it by student or file it by number and grade it all at once and send home by Friday. So I gave myself a deadline. I have to get grading done because stuff goes home on Friday, so I can't fall behind. I also love to use student numbers. Yes, definitely. So that's what I found worked well for me. And then on Thursdays, if I had time, you have things like small group data, intervention data. Here in New Mexico, I'm actually curious about this. Do you guys use SATs and SIPs? I'm kind of curious if that's cross states or just kind of a New Mexico thing. But it's like tier 1 and tier 2 interventions. So we'd have data that we'd have to collect, and we'd have to input that data. And so on Thursdays, I would sit down and just make it my data day. So I would grade papers, grade assessments, and then I would input the data into our tax input data and intervention data. And that way it was all done. So, how the biggest takeaway you can take from this is thinking, what are the main things I need to work on in my classroom on a weekly or monthly basis? And then how can I theme my days so I focus on one thing? Because energetically, I don't know if you can relate to this, but when I first started, I'd have a to-do list that was a mile high, 20, 30, 40 different things to do. And I felt like I was never getting there. But when I show up each day and I have one main thing to focus on, energetically, I feel so much better. And I feel like, okay, I can sit down and designate 20, 30 minutes of pure focus on one thing and get really, really far at it. So that's just how it feels better to me. So, yeah. Do you guys have any questions? Let's see. We talked about classroom management, planning. We can talk about organization if you want. Lisa I don't want to say her name wrong, McArview. She is in this presentation. I've hired her previously to do like sessions for my community on organization. Definitely go check out her session. I don't think it's today, I think it's later. She's a genius when it comes to digital organization. You definitely don't want to miss her. So coming up with ways to like get your inbox to zero and creating labels on the side of your Gmail, and creating files so you can reuse them every year. She's a genius at it. So definitely go check out her session because I adore her, but her session's gonna be really good. So yeah, I think I covered all my systems. Let me know if you have any questions on any other systems. I think trying to do a little of everything every day is what overwhelms me. Thank you. I'm glad you agree, and I'm not alone in that. Yeah. I feel like when you take little pieces of everything every day, you just don't see the progress as much as when you just focus solely on one thing and you can check it off completely. It feels better energetically. I agree with you, Ariel, at least for me. So, yeah. So, let's see. Organization. I mean, I could talk a little bit about organization. Like I said, Lisa's gonna have some really good tips for you. My inbox used to be horrific I used to be embarrassed when we'd sit down through TLCs and I opened my email in front of my coworkers because it'd be like a couple hundred, there's 1,000 of unread emails. So one thing that Lisa taught me and what I've learned is over on the side, depending what email provider you have, both districts I've worked for, we've used Gmail. I make labels, and anything that I've done and completed, I put in a label. So it's done and it's not in my inbox, but let's say I want to keep a copy. So let's say I'm responding to families. I don't want to delete that, but I don't want it to hang out in my inbox. I would respond, and then I drag and drop it to my label of family communication, and it's done. And so when I did that, it made it better energetically to open up my email and not have to worry about having a couple hundred done. Eventually you get to 0, and it's kind of like a checklist or a to-do list in its own. You just check it off and it's done, and you file it away as a little fast time. So my labels for my Gmail, I have this written down somewhere. Obviously I don't have it open in front of me. I'd have those 5 pillars I talked about: family communication, resources, and then you can do sub labels. So I would do like second grade math, second grade reading, second grade social, second grade science. So if a coworker or someone in my district shared something, I could drag and drop it there. I did lesson planning, PD, admin PD, completed PD. I could drag and drop it into a label, and when it was done, that way if they asked me about it later, I could go and click it off. Email organization has always been a strong point for me. Yay, good for you, Ariel. Labels and folders are my jam. Yeah, see, they weren't mine. Not at all when I first started. It was really bad. Thank goodness I learned though, because I had to start pretty much over every year, especially my desktop. I'd go to download and I would search for my resources, or TPT. You go to the search bar and you search your resources and you can't find it, so you buy it, but then a month later you find it. Yeah, that was it. So definitely don't do that. But definitely organizing, your email, your digital folder, so you don't have to reuse it every year. It's going to take you a lot. All right. I hope you guys are having fun. This summit, I love doing. I've done it 4 years now. My 4th year. It's making me sound old now. I love it. All of these presenters are like really good friends of mine, and yeah. So which session are you going to check out after this? Let me know. I, so far, have checked out the Enneagram one. And that one's really cool. I'm an Enneagram 5. So, learning's my jam. So which session are you checking out next? Or have you watched them all? I'm going to take a sip of my coffee. That's very nice. I think Brittany's is today. I'll probably check hers out. I know Brienne. I'm going to check hers out. But let me know if you have any other questions. The summit is amazing. Presenters are amazing. Super awesome. But if you want to connect with me, you can find me at The Present Teacher on pretty much everything. I've got a YouTube. I've got a podcast. And we just hit our 100th episode, which is really exciting. If you want, I'm kind of very vulnerable. I'm very real and authentic. If you want to hear my top 10 mistakes I made my first 6 years of teaching, I have a podcast episode or on my YouTube channel a video that talks about that. Let's see. Phil session. I'm going to have to check it. I just finished the anagram. Yeah, that was pretty good. I like that kind of stuff. I was that kid that would go to the quizzes magazine. Hopefully I'm not aging myself. And I would go and I'd do all the personality quizzes just because they're kind of fun. So I like that one. I'll just check out Phil's session next. I share about that, and then I share about setting up your classroom and kind of which areas I like to focus on systems to get ahead of time. I don't know if you guys are starting soon. My district is starting next week, so definitely I got to get a move on that. And then if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Like I said, I mostly focus on systems. I geek out on those for newer teachers, but I also have a lot of veteran teachers that I get to connect with, which is really cool. We get to share ideas like we did today, and I get ideas and I get to learn stuff. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I had a lot of fun. And I think I gonna go ahead and call it. I'm gonna go hiking now in Sedona. I hope you have a wonderful day. I'll go check out some more sessions, and I will talk to you guys soon. All right, bye guys.